Hello everyone! Today I'm going to be looking at the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. I decided to take a look at these because they're still pretty popular, at least at the time I'm recording this video. Let's just hope that it's still relevant by the time the video actually comes out. Also, the final Guardians of the Galaxy movie came out not too long ago, and as of right now they're saying that they're not going to make another one. And honestly, I hope that they don't make another one, partially because I like how they ended it and I don't want them to ruin it. But mostly because I don't want this video to become outdated. But anyways, let's get started with the first film. The year was 2014, and oh man, was that a big year for movies. Aside from Guardians of the Galaxy, we got such classics like the Lego Movie, The Guardians of the Galaxy was actually not a really well-known comic at the time. A surprising amount of people didn't even know they existed, so they all thought that this film was gonna fail. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Not only did it not fail, it also became a lot of people's favorite Marvel movie for a while. In fact, it's still in my top 3 as of right now. I think the main reason everyone ended up loving this film so much was because it was different from the rest of the MCU movies. Now, it wasn't like a night and day difference, but it was still fairly different at the time. There's probably like a dozen movies like it now, but whenever it first came out, it was pretty unique. I think one of the biggest differences was with the Guardians themselves. When you think of a superhero team, you probably think of people who work really well together, they're super selfless, and they're great at saving the world. Well, the Guardians of the Galaxy are pretty much the exact opposite of that. They don't really work well together. Well, I guess there's a couple of times they do, but the majority of the time they don't. Like in their big slow motion team shot, they're all like yawning and tired and stuff, and they're constantly arguing all the time. They also aren't the best at saving the world. I guess they did save the galaxy at the end of the film through like the power of friendship or something. I guess Peter being related to a Celestial did help. They're also super selfish, like the only reason they team up in the first place is because they all want money. I guess technically Drax is doing it for revenge, but the rest of them are only doing it for the money. Rocket was perfectly fine with selling a weapon that could destroy planets if it meant he got some money. Even when they decide to save the galaxy, it's not because billions of people could die, or even because it's the right thing to do. It's because they're one of the idiots living in it.
We're wanted by the Nova Corps. Just give it to Ronan so he can destroy the galaxy? What are you, some saint all of a sudden? What has the galaxy ever done for you? Why would you want to save it? Because I'm one of the idiots who lives in it!
On paper, it shouldn't have worked, but James Gunn and the actors made it work so well. Aside from that, there's some other smaller differences, and now this is in my opinion, but I feel like the comedy in this film is a lot better than other Marvel movies. They use the loud equals funny tactic a lot, which in most movies it probably wouldn't work, but it actually kind of fits well here. I do think that they overdo it in the sequels, but they don't in this one. But I think we all know that the main reason these movies are so funny is because of Drax. Like I said earlier, it's not like a night and day difference. There is some stuff that are exactly like the other Marvel movies. Like the lifeless CGI army and the main character with dead parents. They also introduced a lot of stuff in this movie. Like they had a scene with Thanos, which I don't know if it was the first time he appeared in the MCU, but it definitely was the first time he actually had a role in a movie. They also officially introduced the Infinity Stones, which James Gunn said he had to come up with the names for them for like 30 minutes, which I don't know if that's entirely true, but if it is, that's hilarious. Also, the soundtrack is amazing. The Guardians of the Galaxy movies use some of the best songs ever. James Gunn actually said he picks the songs while writing the script so that way he can incorporate them into the story, and I think that's really cool. I honestly don't have a lot of problems with this movie. Now, it's not perfect, there's a lot of smaller problems that almost every movie has. But as far as like big problems go, there's not really any in my opinion. They took a lot of risks with this film, and I'm so glad they did because this movie is amazing. I really hope that Marvel will start making more unique movies like Guardians of the Galaxy instead of just making sequels to the already established superheroes. It might not work out as well as the Guardians of the Galaxy, but I still think they should try it out more often. But now, it's time to move on to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 came out 4 years after the first one, and it received mixed reviews. I've seen people say it's either good, okay, or fine. I personally think the film is pretty good. Now, it's not as good as the other Guardians of the Galaxy films. In fact, it's probably the worst of the 3. But it's still better than a lot of the other MCU movies in my opinion. A lot of the stuff I said about the first film can apply to this film. Maybe not the uniqueness, but a lot of the other stuff I said still applies. Like, they're still super uncoordinated. Like, in the beginning of the film, they fight an obelisk, and it feels like they didn't plan anything. Like, Star-Lord didn't know that Gamora was gonna use a gun, Rocket thought he was supposed to set up the music even though he wasn't, and Drax just straight up goes rogue halfway through the fight. Like I said earlier, it shouldn't work, but somehow it does. Now, this film does have some stuff that I didn't really like, and I think most other people didn't really like them either. I feel like the main characters have a lot of plot armor. Now, I know that almost every main character from any movie ever has plot armor, but I feel like the Guardians have more than usual. Like, whenever the Milano gets shot down and Drax gets smashed into a bunch of trees, he doesn't even have a scratch on him. And whenever we get the team shot, Mantis gets hit in the head by a giant rock, and she's fine. Now, I get that most of these were for jokes, but I still don't think it was a good idea. Because if the main characters are invincible, then to the audience, they won't ever be in any danger. I also think that the second act kinda drags on for too long. Everything starts moving super slowly, and I feel like if they made it shorter or a little more interesting, it would have been a lot better. They also made Mantis know that Ego is a bad guy, but she doesn't actually tell the Guardians until it's almost too late. Those were some of the biggest problems I had with the movie. The other ones are problems you can find in pretty much any movie. But there's still a ton of stuff I loved about this movie. The comedy is really good. It's not as good as the first, but it's still really funny. I also thought that Ego was a pretty good villain. He wasn't as developed as someone like Thanos, but I still thought he was pretty good. And I personally think he's a better villain than Ronan from the first film. And honestly speaking, I think Ego is one of the biggest threats to the MCU. Let's look at Thanos again. He ended up erasing half the universe, whereas Ego almost destroyed the entire galaxy. I don't know how much of a threat Kang is going to end up being, because as of right now, Jonathan Majors is a bigger threat than he is. But as of right now, Ego was the biggest threat to the MCU in my opinion. But without a doubt, the best part of the movie, and I think that everyone will agree with me on this, was Yondu. They do a complete 180 with his character, and I absolutely love it. In the first movie, they kind of made Yondu like an antagonist that the audience didn't really like. But in this one, they completely reverse it and make him one of the best characters in the entire movie. So of course he's the one they decide to kill off. But I'll give it to him. They made his death one of the best and saddest scenes in the entire MCU. And of course, the soundtrack is great. It's actually what got me into records. So overall, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is a pretty good sequel. The second act kind of drags on for too long, but the first and third act are still amazing. But now it's time to move on to the third and final movie of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 released 5 years after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Man, they really need to start making movies faster. I'm joking, of course. I'm actually really glad they took their time on this, because Marvel really needed a win right now. I think we can all agree that Phase 4 of the MCU was pretty bad. We did get a couple of really good films like Spider-Man No Way Home and Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings. But the rest of the Phase 4 movies were either okay or just bad. And don't even get me started on the TV shows. And then we got Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which is supposed to be the big start for Phase 5. And that movie just ended up being mid at the very best. So people started losing faith that we would ever get another good Marvel movie again. But then Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 came out. This movie is exactly what Marvel needed right now. It's on par, if not better, than the original Guardians of the Galaxy film. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I feel like this is a great ending for the Guardians of the Galaxy. They just wrapped up everything so well. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does follow the trend where a third film in a trilogy has to be the darkest of the three. It's honestly one of the darkest MCU movies out there in my opinion. And it's super sad too. It's not as sad as like Yondu's death from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but it's still sadder than most Marvel movies. It also surprisingly doesn't follow the trend where a main character has to die. Especially because all the trailers made it look like that Rocket was gonna die, which I guess he technically did, but then he was brought back to life. I also heard some people say that Drax was gonna die, but no, none of the main characters died. They did do a couple of fake outs on us though, like with the Rocket throughout the entire movie. And with Peter Quill whenever he almost suffocated in space, which like, I'm glad they didn't kill him off, but man, that would have been such a good way to do it. Having him die the same way Yondu died would have been a great way to send the character off if they had to kill him. But I'm glad they didn't kill him off, because I liked how they ended his character. I'm honestly glad they didn't kill off any of the main characters actually, because not every trilogy has to end depressingly. I'm glad that James Gunn decided to give this trilogy a happy ending. Now, I don't really like the ending that they went with, like, the dance party. That's the best you could have done. I mean, I guess it fits. Maybe I'm just used to kids' movies throwing in random dance parties at the end because they couldn't figure out how to properly end it. I personally think they should have ended it whenever Peter reunited with his grandpa. But I guess James Gunn technically had to end it with Rocket because this is supposed to be his story, even though he's barely in it, and when he is, it's flashbacks. The ending we got isn't the worst thing ever. It does wrap up the stories pretty well. I just feel like they could have done better than a dance party. I also feel like the loud equals funny tactic was cranked up to 100 in this film. Like, every other conversation the Guardians had with each other was them yelling for no reason. It works in some parts, but I feel like they definitely overdid it in this one. Also, I mean, I guess this isn't really a complaint, just more like a plot hole. But, like, Rocket decides not to kill the High Evolutionary because he says he's a guardian of the galaxy. That would have been a really good moment if they didn't show a scene of the Guardians just massacring tons of goons like 10 minutes ago. Alright, now let's talk about Adam Warlock. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 had an end credit scene setting up Adam Warlock, so you'd think he'd be the main villain, or at least an important character. But no, it just feels like he was just forced into the plot. I'm actually pretty sure he was, because in an interview, James Gunn said the hardest part about this movie was finding a way to put Adam Warlock in the film. He had so much potential too, like the part in the beginning where he just destroys the Guardians. That part was so good, but then he gets stabbed and then turns into a child for the rest of the film. Their excuse is that the High Evolutionary took him out of his cocoon too early. Like, really? If you're gonna set up a character to be the main villain, at least give us a good reason why he isn't. I don't know if he's going to appear in another movie, but if he does, he needs a redemption, because he did not get that in this movie. But I'm going to give them a little pass on this though, because the rest of the movie was still really good. Adam Warlock may not have been the main villain, but the High Evolutionary was still really good. I've heard people say that the High Evolutionary is what Kang should have been in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and I kind of agree with them. I personally thought that the High Evolutionary was a better villain than Kang. Maybe it was because the High Evolutionary felt more unhinged than Kang, or maybe it was because Kang got beat up by a bunch of ants. I don't know for sure. But just because there's quite a bit of stuff I didn't like, doesn't make this a bad film. It's still amazing. There was so much that I loved about this film. The story was great, the action was amazing, and like I said earlier, they ended the characters really well. I also loved the part where Groot said, "I love you guys." James Gunn revealed that that was the audience finally becoming a part of the Guardians and finally being able to understand Groot's language. And Vin Diesel finally got to say something that wasn't "I am Groot," so that's a plus. So overall, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are some of the best Marvel movies out there. And while they're not perfect, they're still so much fun to watch. It's sad to see them go, but all good things must come to an end eventually. At least we still have the 3 films and the Christmas special. Let's just hope that Marvel doesn't get greedy and decide to make another one. Or at least not with the same cast. If it's a new team of Guardians like the ones they showed at the end of the film, then I wouldn't really mind that. As long as they don't bring back the original Guardians, then I don't mind. But anyways, that's it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.